Wildes. Today we are talking about the serious question on everyone's mind. Did it really happen? We all love Torah, we all believe in Torah, we all build our lives around Torah, but as you discussed in one of your recent shirim, we wouldn't just take advice from a doctor who said, oh, your lab results are true in a symbolic sense, or we wouldn't listen if our mechanic said, well, I didn't do any real tests, but I have faith that it's probably you need a new alternator. And in the same way, we wouldn't look to Torah and say, well, it's symbolically true and that's good enough. People want to know that this is a document with a divine origin about events that really happened. And so today I'm going to bring you some of the challenges that I've heard other Jews bring to me about the question, did these things in the Torah really happen? So why don't we start at the very beginning? Please tell us, how did we receive the Torah?
Wow. First of all, I want to say something about the general question. I do believe most of what the Torah records took place in history, but the Torah at the same time is not a history book. We're not meant to learn history from the Torah. We should study history independent of the Torah. The Torah is there to teach values and lessons. In order to do that, there has to be some historicity, there has to be some authenticity to these stories, but not everything 100%, in my opinion, has to line up with the historical account. And we'll get to that. But but I do think, on the other hand, that if the whole thing is just one big metaphor, people are just not going to take it seriously.
Right.
What was your question?
Good question. Well, how did we receive the Torah? Was it written by people? Was it written by the hand of God directly?
Yes and no. So we believe that the Jewish people in mass were gathered around this mountain called Mount Sinai in the wilderness. We don't know exactly where it is, but somewhere between Egypt and Israel in the wilderness, in the desert. And God actually in the Torah tells the Jewish people to get ready, to prepare themselves by husbands and wives separating physically for 3 days, not being intimate for that time, and getting themselves just in general spiritually prepared for this incredible moment where God is going to reveal himself to the Jewish people. And that moment is referred to as Revelation. It is a key moment in Jewish history and a very, very important part of our faith to believe that there was that moment, that God himself, we believe, spoke to the Jews, made himself humanly audible in the ears of people. And not just to one or two people, not just to Moses or Aaron, his brother, or to the elders or the scholars, but, and this is what distinguishes Judaism from all of the other monotheistic faiths, to the entire men, women, and children. The Torah tells us about 600,000 men, ages 20 to 60. There was a military census taken around that time. We extrapolate, women, children, people under 20, over 60. You're talking 2 to 3 million people. That's the classic traditional understanding of the giving of the Torah at Sinai.
But when all of these people gathered, what did they receive? Did they receive 10 commandments? Did they receive the whole law? Did they receive the full 5 books of Moses?
No. There aren't any opinions that believe that they received all 5 books, although the Talmud seems to indicate that that was God's original intention, not simply to communicate the 10 commandments directly and then give the rest over through Moses, which is what we believe happened traditionally, but that the entirety of the 5 books of Moses would be given over directly. It seems as though from a purely spiritual perspective, it was too difficult for the Jewish people to handle, and therefore God limits it to the 10. And according to some opinions in the Talmud, not all 10. That the Jewish people turned back after the first commandment, and another opinion says after the first 2 commandments. They said, it's enough, we'll take the rest from you, Moshe. They couldn't handle it. It was too much of a spiritual experience. I got too close, if you will, to the divine for them to be able to handle it.
And of course, the first commandments are really Hashem announcing to the people that he is Lord, he is the number one, and there's no other. And so,
and by the way, what's interesting is the first commandment is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. The second was don't have any other gods.
Okay.
So some of the rabbis who believe it was only the first 2 like to use those two as encapsulating all of Judaism, because all the 613 mitzvot that emerge from the Torah are either do's or don'ts. They're positive commandments, believe in me, or negative commandments, things you should not do, like don't have any other gods before me. And those come to sort of symbolize the two different, but according to that opinion, it was just the first two mitzvot from God that the Jewish people heard directly.
And then everything else that's contained in Torah, all of the rest of the law, they received through Moses.
Right.
And they accepted it because they had heard the voice of God.
They accepted it because they had two things. A, they heard the voice of God themselves, and they heard God tell Moshe, come closer. And they all know that he went up for 40 days, 40 nights. They were calculating, they were coming. You remember when he came down, and they lost faith, they miscalculated, is he going to come back at all? So then they wrecked this golden calf. So they understood why Moses went up there, which was to get the rest, which was to receive the rest of the prophecies that they weren't either worthy of or they couldn't handle. And so Moshe had that authenticity to him. It's like basically, Daniel, if I say to you, I want you to go out and tell everyone what Mark Wildes, I'm going to play God for a minute. Okay, what I need to do is what is going to give the trust, the authenticity to the people out there that what you're saying is really what I'm telling you.
Right.
What I do is I gather all those people and I speak to you in their presence. And that's essentially what God did with Moses in the presence of the rest of the Jewish people.
And then the rest of the Jewish people know, okay, Moses is a trusted voice. He's trusted to communicate the words of God, so we're going to listen to him.
Right, and not because of anything Moses said,
right,
but because of what they heard from God.
That makes sense. Okay. And then Moses communicates to them the whole 5 books of Moses, is that right?
So, yes, he comes back from 40 days and 40 nights with a lot of information.
Right.
There is an interesting debate as to whether or not Moses heard the rest of the Torah during those 40 days, 40 nights, or over the next 38, 39 years during their sojourn in the wilderness. Remember, they receive the Torah right after they get out of Egypt. The way you remember that is because Passover celebrates the Exodus. Shavuot, 49 days later, celebrates the giving of the Torah at Sinai. It was only 7 weeks after the Exodus that they stood at Sinai to receive the Torah. What did they do for the rest of the sojourn in the wilderness besides kvetching and complaining and it's hot and we have nothing to eat?
Right.
They're learning. They're studying from their teacher Moshe. Moshe reveals to the rest of the Jewish people what he heard from God. Now, there is a process, and the great Maimonides, great Jewish philosopher, lived in the 1200s, the Rambam writes that when Moses would come back, he would reveal either from the 40 days, 40 nights. Maimonides of the opinion that he got it all in the 40 days, 40 nights.
Okay.
But there are other opinions that said that every time Moses was called into the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, God would communicate to Moses another part of the Torah. Moshe would then assemble his brother, Aaron, and he goes through the details on this, and we teach this in the fellowship class. We did this together, if you remember. But he would tell something to Aaron, his brother, something he had heard from Hashem.
Right.
The verse in the Torah that was written, and its explanation. This is the beginnings of the oral tradition. Moshe would give over that oral tradition to Aaron. Aaron would then sit beside him. His 2 sons, Elazar and Itamar, Aaron's 2 sons, Moshe's nephews, would come in. He would repeat it again in the presence of Aaron. Right. They would then take a seat. The elders would then come in. The 70 elders would repeat it again. So now Aaron heard it a third time.
Right.
The sons, Elazar and Itamar, heard it a second time.
Nice.
The elders are hearing it for the first time. And then he would do the same thing for the rest of the community, and the elders would disseminate the information. This is the way the Midrash, Maimonides is quoting the Midrash, part of rabbinic literature, explains how Moshe gave over all of this oral information that wasn't written down,
right,
to explain the Torah, the actual written. Now, the written part, the actual 5 books, was written by Moses in the form of a Torah scroll.
On paper, on parchment.
On parchment.
Okay.
And we have a tradition, Maimonides brings this down as well, that at the end of Moses' life, he left the Jewish people with 13 Torah scrolls, 1 for each tribe, and 1 to be left in the tabernacle, alongside the Ark of the Covenant, the Oel Moed.
Right. And so it's an essential article of faith for Jews, right? That the Torah that we all have in our Chumashim, on the scroll in the Ark, that is the Torah. There's no debate about the text that's in that. It comes directly from Moses.
We believe that, correct?
Right. And then there's also, well, we can talk about the...
I mean, I can't, listen, can I prove? I can't prove because I don't have any kind of recording, video or the like from the original giving of the Torah at Sinai or any of those encounters between God and Moses during the 40 years in the Oel Moed in the tent of meeting that I can compare what we have now to that.
Right.
We don't have that record, obviously. But what we do have is called in Hebrew the Masorah. Masorah means the transmission of this oral tradition. And unless there's a good reason to doubt or to believe that somehow it was made up, fabricated, I guess there could be a little healthy skepticism and ask yourself, well, if something is passed down from generation to generation by so many different people, doesn't it get lost? Things get lost a little, things get changed. You know the game of telephone.
Right, it's hard to remember something from a few days ago.
Well, the way the remembering seems to have taken place is through study and learning. It seems as though we were the people of the book from the very first day.
Right.
We were just learning and reviewing, applying, discussing, and that's how you keep a tradition alive.
Right.
A lot of people have asked me this question: why didn't they just write it down? Why didn't they just write the oral tradition down as to what each verse meant and what did God mean when He said this, and so on and so forth? And there are a lot of different answers to this. My favorite answer, which I believe to be the truth, is that something that gets written down and is in a book can often just sit and collect dust on a shelf.
Right.
What God did, and he gambled in a sense, was that He wanted this to be a living and breathing, I wouldn't even say a document, a living and breathing tradition, Torah.
Right.
And therefore He makes its continuity dependent on us teaching, on a parent teaching a child, a mother, daughter, father, son, teacher, student. And if the teachers stop teaching the students, the parents stop telling their kids what this is all about, the whole thing comes to an end.
Right.
Oh, there's a book somewhere. Yeah, we have the book. We can open up the book and look it up. No. Right. We do have that for the 5 books of Moses. We don't have that for its understanding.
Right.
And that's really what makes the Jewish people unique. The whole world has the Bible.
Right.
It's only we who possess its true understanding, and that's the oral tradition. And I know that sounds a little, exclusive or a little, what's the word? Chauvinistic.
Superior. Yeah.
Well, no one else actually even claims to have an oral tradition as to what these verses mean.
That's true.
When even a Christian scholar teaches verses from the Bible, they're teaching those verses based on their teachers, which is based on their interpretation of the biblical text as it appears to them.
I think in a lot of cases, Christian scholars will even lean on Talmud to understand the Bible.
They should. I think. Now, the Talmud is what's written down.
Right.
It wasn't supposed to be written down, but for historical reasons, it was written down centuries later.
Is
the oral
the
tradition.
Talmud the same as the oral tradition?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. It's the writings down of the oral tradition. You should also know that the Zohar and other Kabbalistic writings are the writings down, also the writings down of our oral tradition, just the more esoteric, philosophical, or metaphysics parts of Judaism are written down in the Kabbalistic text. It's also part of the oral tradition.
And in case people don't know, roughly how much text is it? The Talmud and all of those.
It's 2,711 pages.
Wow.
Is the Talmudic. And you have to understand that's just the beginning. Because that spurred so much further discussion, commentary, and dialogue and scholarship. So it's huge. And that's, listen, you go to yeshiva today, go to any decent, what we would consider Torah study on an advanced level.
Right.
What are they studying there all day?
Talmud.
Yeah, why?
Because it's fun.
Okay, it has an intellectual kind of rigor to it. Why don't they just studying the Bible?
I think everyone who's there is pretty familiar with what's in the Bible. They heard it every week growing up, right?
I mean, that's nice of you to presume. It's probably not so true. A lot of, we hear it read every Shabbat, and most of the yeshiva students have been learning this since they're 3 or 4 or 5.
Right.
So presumably we know a lot of that stuff already. But that's not the main reason we're studying Talmud. Because the Talmud is the oral tradition.
Right.
And the oral tradition is the only way to unlock the secrets of the Bible, of the Torah,
and
of the 5 books.
And we believe that it comes from God just as much as the text of the Torah.
The oral tradition?
Yes.
Yes, but meaning certain principles are passed down from generation to generation. And I'll give you an example. But other things that are mentioned in the Talmud are discussions of the rabbis and the sages,
right,
as to how to understand the verses in the Torah when there is no received tradition.
Right.
So, for example, I always love to use this example, the tefillin.
Yes.
What color are they?
Black.
Right. You ever seen a red pair of tefillin?
No.
No. Does it say anywhere in the 5 books of Moses tefillin need to be black?
No.
No. So how do we know they're black? It's a received tradition. So it's called in Hebrew halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
Right.
And you ever seen a round pair of tefillin?
No.
Right. They're all boxes.
All a box.
Box also, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. You have a lot of examples of how big is a sukkah, what constitutes the schach, the roofing of a sukkah, how do you produce a proper parchment on which you can write a mezuzah or tefillin or sefer Torah, a Torah scroll. All of those things are halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but there are many things that were left open for the sages of the Sanhedrin to figure out on their own,
right,
using certain principles.
Right.
Certain legal principles. We call them Yud Gimel Midot, the 13 hermeneutical principles.
Right.
So, for example, the Torah says, Ki kach ish isha, when a man takes a woman as his wife. The Torah doesn't tell us, how does a man take a woman as his wife? So we have a tradition that is derived from the sages, by the sages, that it's either through document, money, or intercourse.
Right, right.
And each different rabbis, opine as to, which is the proper way for a man to wed. Now, it's not mentioned. It's not a received tradition on that verse, that when the verse says in the Torah that when a man takes a woman, that it means he has to sign he has to sign a contract, or it's through sexual intercourse, or it's through what we call kesef, transferring something of value, which is the way we do it today.
Right.
That's the ring. So the rabbis used one of the 13 hermeneutical principles called Gezerah Shava, where you see the same phrase or word used in one part of the Torah. You can borrow its meaning from one part to another part.
Right.
And that's how we marry today. A man gives us something of value over to the woman. Why? Because that's what the rabbis saw when Abraham was purchasing a plot of land to bury his beloved Sarah. Same language is used. What affected that kinyan, that legal connection between Abraham and the land he was purchasing? What can affect a kiddushin, a marriage between a husband and wife? Same language in the Torah. Let's use the same laws that apply to one another. It's called Gezerah Shava. But it's not anyone doing this, not me or you. It's the members of the Sanhedrin who represent the populace of the Jewish people, using one of the 13 principles passed down from God to Moses on Sinai.
Right.
And that's how some of oral law has been developed over the years. So it wouldn't be fair to say it's all from God.
Right, right.
But interestingly, that is still, that when a man marries a woman under the chuppah, using this, is that a biblical or rabbinic? A lot of people get tripped up on this and they think, oh, it must be rabbinic because it's the rabbis.
Right.
But the rabbis are interpreting a verse in the Torah.
Okay.
They're giving their explanation for what the Torah means. So it's a biblical source for this, not rabbinic. To be in contradistinction to a rabbinic law.
Okay.
This is not a rabbinic law. What's an example of a rabbinic law?
Good question.
Yeah, like...
There's lots. Oh, there's just too many to
So let's say
list.
on Shabbat we don't write. One of the 39 forbidden labors is writing.
Right.
Because it was one of the things that went into the building or the maintenance of the tabernacle. So can I carry a pen around in my pocket? So from the Torah's perspective, yeah, as long as you don't write with it. But the rabbis came along and they created what's called a safeguard.
Right.
And they said, better not to put the pen in your lapel jacket or pocket,
Right.
because you might inadvertently, and that's classic rabbinic law. It's setting up a fence to ensure that a rule of the Torah itself is not violated.
Right. If you're someone who likes to fiddle with things and like flip things around in your hand, and if you're holding something, you're bound to play with it.
Yeah.
And if you're holding a pen, you might be bound to write with it.
Right. Now, when the rabbis created these laws, they have a concept called lo plug. We don't start analyzing, Wildes is a little less fidgety than Koster, so like it's only a prohibition for Wildes and not Koster.
It's across the board.
It's across the board because they're creating a legal system.
Okay.
So it would not be fair to say that everything in the old tradition is from God.
Okay.
Some of it's from the rabbis interpreting God's words from the Torah.
Right.
Right, like the example of the marriage, and then some is just literally made up by the rabbis, which they will authorize to do from the Torah to enact law to ensure that the laws of the Torah themselves are not violated.
Maybe to pick an example that's more present for people or maybe more challenging for people is the prohibition against mixing meat and dairy.
Great example.
It doesn't say in the Torah, don't mix meat and dairy. But there is a line in the Torah that the rabbis have interpreted to mean that. And that's why it's not considered a rabbinic law, right? It's considered a Torah law.
Right. I mean, it says pretty straight, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Do not cook the kid in its mother's milk.
Right.
Now, you could read that a whole bunch of different ways, but again, the oral tradition passed down from Moses all the way, we have a way of reading this, which means not to mix any meat or milk.
Right.
Because you could read it as just saying, don't mix that kid in its mother's milk.
Well, that seems to be what it's saying.
Right. But again, it also says in the Torah, an eye for an eye.
Right.
That's what it seems to be saying too. Do we do that? Literally?
Not literally, no.
No, why not?
Well, we've interpreted it to a way that seems easier to follow.
Okay.
It's the value of an eye, right?
So this is very important, though, the way you just phrased that. Which is really good.
Okay.
We've interpreted it in a way that we can, what did you say?
I think that it's easier to actually do.
Right.
Easier to
so
follow.
that's not, we can't have a legal system based on preference, simply.
Yeah.
What's politically correct, because that means that laws will change from time to time.
Right.
They won't have any authenticity to them. They won't have any lasting impact because, a new generation will come about that will look at mixing wool and linen. They'll be like, that doesn't really resonate with me. Let's reinterpret that.
Well, sure.
So we don't do that. We try to stay away from that. The reason we interpret the verse, an eye for an eye, not literally, that it means monetary damages. If, God forbid, you were to take out another person's eye, we wouldn't, God forbid, take out your eye.
Right.
It's not just because it's considered barbaric, it's considered primitive or backward or politically incorrect.
Right.
That's not the way we were taught through our old tradition to read the phrase.
Right. And it's probably a discussion for another time, but you can see what happens if you start to make allowances for like, this law is too challenging to follow, or this law doesn't fit with our modern morality. It's easy to get carried away.
Yeah,
you can see communities that have gotten carried away.
Well, of course, but listen, the Reform movement is not ashamed of that. The Reform movement set out intentionally to reform Judaism.
Right.
That's why it was called Reform Judaism. And to say that to begin interpreting laws that are out of sync with modern day sensibilities. And now here's the problem. What's a modern day sensibility? It depends where you live.
Right.
If you live in the West and you're a progressive liberal, or if you live in the West and you grew up in Texas, I mean, it could really, that's why there needs to be some sort of objective interpretation and understanding of these phrases that are not subject to your whim, what you're feeling today, the way the wind is blowing this week in your society where you happen to live. That's incredibly, incredibly important. The Reform movement, though, felt that in order for Judaism to continue into modernity, they would have to do just that, which is just reinterpret or change or remove laws that seem out of whack with modern day sensibilities. But if you want to maintain a certain authenticity to the Torah and what it meant thousands of years ago and what it's still supposed to mean today, you can't do that.
For the sake of argument, I'm going to try to defend the Reform way of thinking and see if we can learn something from it. I think what a Reform rabbi would say is, well, for a long time, the rabbis have been interpreting Jewish law. They've, that's what the Talmud is. They've been interpreting it. They've been helping us understand how to follow the laws. And they did that based on their understanding of the world at the time and place that they lived. We are in the Reform movement. We're rabbis too. And don't we also have the authority to interpret based on what we understand?
Great question. Difference between rabbis then and rabbis today.
Right.
The rabbis then who had that authority, derived their authority from the Torah.
Okay.
A contemporary rabbi does not, even if it's a Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, arguably the two greatest rabbis, Lubavitcher Rebbe from the 20th century, because the rabbis meant the representative rabbis of the generation, which was specifically the Sanhedrin. God commanded Moses to create a high court, and that high court would be the greatest 70 scholars of every generation. We had a Sanhedrin from the days of Moses until the Romans disbanded it around the time of the Second Temple's destruction. And the reason their rules and their interpretation and their rabbinic law stayed and has a certain authenticity that even Rav Moshe Feinstein or Rabbi Soloveitchik wouldn't today, is because they represented the populace. They actually represented the people, and they are who God, we believe, is referring to in the verse that says, listen to the sages of your generation. That's who they were talking about. But once there's no Sanhedrin, once there's no authorized body of rabbinic authority, okay, then what you have are great scholars who can opine and interpret, but their interpretations are not going to carry the same significance as previous generations that were members of the Sanhedrin. And I know it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but it's a very, very important difference. So I can't get up and promulgate a new rule and a new law. And neither could Rav Moshe Feinstein or Rabbi Soloveitchik, nor did they ever try. Because they understood their place. They understood that. And so that's where the argument would come in. That's how I would respond to such a claim.
Well, okay. So you said that like modern rabbis after the Sanhedrin can't institute new laws. But then you say, well, when cars came out, maybe cars are a bad example, but like when electric lights came out, didn't the rabbis institute a new rule when they said you can't use them on Shabbat?
No. All they're doing, and this is a very good illustration, Daniel, all they're doing is taking pre-existing legislation and I don't want to say interpreting it. That would be a bad word. An inappropriate word here. And applying it to a new situation. Now, what you'd have to do is you'd have to be a bit of an engineer or consultant engineer and understand what is the nature of electricity. Then you'd have to ask yourself, now that I understand the way electricity works, and there might be some debate on that, I have to see, does it fall under any of the forbidden labors of work? I'm putting in quotes.
Malachot, right?
Very good. That the Torah forbids me to engage in on Shabbat. Is it considered eish when I flick a light on? Is it considered creating a fire or increasing a flame? Is it, maybe it's not, because fluorescent versus incandescent, it depends. How is it operating to turn on the...
And LEDs really do not seem like a fire.
Correct. That's why it's less of an issue with an LED. Is it bona? We're not allowed to build on Shabbos. The completion of a circuit could be understood as... But you understand what you're doing here when you start making this kind of analysis is that you're not creating anything new. You're taking your pre-existing definition of melacha and you're applying it to something that's, some new technological breakthrough. Same thing with fertility breakthroughs, the same thing with computer science, AI. We literally do this, everything. We have this whole body of written law, the 5 books of Moses, as understood through the eyes of the oral tradition. We take all of that, and then we take our lives today, and we say, what is it about? Let's say they came up with a new way of aborting a fetus.
They probably do all the time.
Would that somehow be a way of getting around the prohibition of abortion? There is such a prohibition. There are some exceptions under halacha. We're a little more liberal than the Catholic Church. There are certain instances that permit abortion if the life of the mother is in danger and so on and so forth. But maybe they could come up with some new way of aborting a fetus that doesn't somehow violate the nature of the prohibition. Now, they haven't, okay? And if you take its life, doesn't matter how you take the life.
Right.
But I was just throwing that out. Like, new technology for, I don't know, anything. You're not permitted, you gave the example, mixing meat and milk.
Right.
What about fake meat?
Good question.
Right.
Is it meat?
The
Is it not
Impossible
meat?
Burger. So if it's not real meat, it's technically not a prohibition of mixing meat and milk. There might be a rabbinic issue of what's called in Hebrew maris ayin.
People see you eating a cheeseburger.
It looks like you're eating a cheeseburger,
Right.
but that's why if it becomes known at some point, oh, there are a lot of parva meat now.
Right.
Or there's some sort of sign and you go to a certain restaurant, they had this when they came out with non-dairy creamer. So a lot of the kosher establishments require the non-dairy creamer to be in a pre-existing bottle or little capsule that has a label on it. Because otherwise it looks like you're putting milk,
Right. Of
and
course.
in your tea or coffee when you're having a meat meal.
Right.
But that's a rabbinic issue. That's not a biblical one. That's not mixing meat or milk because it's not milk.
It's not milk. And the vegan cheese has come a long way, by the way. I hope one day our sponsor is the grocery store downstairs, and they have they do like these beef quesadillas, and it almost is too good where you think this must be forbidden because this is just too realistic.
I hope I didn't take you too far away. How do we know this happened into this whole...
Well, it's all interesting, but let's make sure that we give people's doubts like their due attention.
Yeah.
So it seems like in a perfect world, you would be able, me as a Jew, I'd be able to say, well, my father taught me this tradition and his father taught him his tradition. And I trust those people and they trusted their fathers. And that chain of custody of the tradition goes all the way back to Sinai.
Yeah.
And so I trust each link in that chain that ultimately we really did hear the voice of God. But for a lot of modern Jews, maybe your father didn't teach you the tradition directly.
Right.
Maybe your parents converted and you've received this tradition and you say, well, how am I really supposed to trust that it didn't just get made up somewhere along the way? That's challenging for people.
It's very challenging. Good question. So to answer this question, I think we have to ask ourselves how we know any historical event occurred that we ourselves never experienced. And
Good
generally
question.
speaking, right, we believe in such events based on what we call secondhand knowledge, right? We don't have much of a choice because there are many instances where we are asked to believe in things that we never eyewitnessed ourselves or perhaps there's no physical evidence of. I mean, I always give this example of the Holocaust. I mean, unfortunately, we're getting to a time when there are less and less survivors alive. What happens if somehow all of that evidence is lost after the survivors are all gone?
Good question.
I mean, will we stop believing there was a Holocaust?
Well, some people are way ahead of you on that one.
Yeah. The only basis for believing remains secondhand knowledge. And one of my teachers, you should live and be well, Rabbi Chait, explained that there are basically two criteria that have to be fulfilled when you rely on secondhand information. First, you have to know that the person or people who witnessed the event understood it correctly.
Okay.
So they can transmit it to others. And number two, it has to be something that they or subsequent generations did not fabricate. That's the big question.
Right.
That it wasn't made up.
Right.
So let's apply that to the situation at Sinai. Right. The first one's easy to satisfy. The Bible describes it as an experience that was simple enough for people to perceive, so ordinary people could understand what they witnessed. And communicate it to the next generation. That's why the verses in the Torah where we learn the story from, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. So people walked away. It was like, wow, God spoke to me, and they're going to relate that to the next generation. But what about the second criteria, that it wasn't made up? How do we know that that whole thing we read about in the Bible, it was just fabricated?
Yeah, that's challenging.
Okay, so... maybe Moses or some other Jewish leader conspired with the people and just made the whole thing up. So how do you rule out the possibility of fabrication?
Well, especially because it could have been fabricated anywhere along a 2,000, 3,000 year history. Someone could have said, I want to be in charge of everyone, and so I'm going to tell people that I have the word of God here in my hand.
Okay, so here's how I respond to that. And I put this in the book in chapter 2.
What book?
It's called The Jewish Experience.
Oh.
Isn't that the name of this podcast?
It is. I think I saw that on the shelf at West Side Judaica, which is a fine bookseller here on the Upper West Side.
They're going to be very happy that you plugged this
Hopefully
store.
one day they'll be our sponsor.
Amen. So to answer the question, we're more likely to accept information as true when many people claim they personally witnessed the event.
Okay.
Why? Now, why is that? Because we consider mass conspiracy absurd, or at least highly unlikely. So the more people who say that they themselves experienced something, the more believable the event becomes. I always love to give the example of, and I think in class when you were there, I gave this example about waiting at the train.
Yeah.
So let's say the 20 people standing waiting for the train, one of them comes over and says, Daniel, didn't you hear the A train you're waiting for derailed?
Oh.
It's not coming.
Okay.
He leaves the train station, leaving you there with 19 others.
Right.
Do you leave?
Well, if everyone else is staying, then they probably... I guess it's a tough question. I have nothing better to do. I'll stick around.
Okay, good. 5 people come over to you. They don't seem to know each other, and they independently tell you, didn't you hear the train? And you have no phone. You get no cell reception. You have to rely on these people. I'm trying to make a point here.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, when you can go from 1 to 5, what changed?
If it's 5, I'm probably more likely to try
Right.
to find
I do
a
this
bus.
with my class until I get, there's always one schnook in class who's like staying there until the 19 people, he's standing there all alone waiting for the train.
Right.
So what changed? What changed from when the first person told you the train was derailed to the 20th? The information was the same, but the likelihood of 20 people conspiring to lie is much less than if it was 1 or 2 people.
Yeah.
Now, that's, of course, doesn't prove it took place. It just decreases the likelihood of fabrication. That's precisely, by the way, why lawyers, my previous life, employ this thing called corroboration.
Right.
Meaning they bring in witnesses to say the same thing.
Right.
They'd be like, why are you wasting the court's time by bringing in someone else to say the same thing the guy said before? Because it decreases the likelihood of fabrication if more and more people... Now, could everyone have conspired and gotten together and lied? 100%.
Right. Of
But
course.
it's less likely when more and more people say so. Corroboration doesn't prove the testimony is true, but each new witness who steps forward reduces the likelihood of fabrication. Now, let's continue. Judaism's claim that millions of people witnessed the revelation, in contrast to other faith systems, whose claim is that only a handful of people.
Right.
Case of Christianity was just Jesus, and there was some other there, here and there, and he then had to use miracles to prove this to other people. But the claim that he made was that he prophesied. He had an encounter with God. Right? Now, it's possible that the Jewish... You had a question?
Well, I know in the story of Jesus, lots of people heard him speak and like received learning from him, but a very small number of people really witnessed like the miracles that he performed.
Right.
It wasn't hundreds of thousands.
Right, but why was he performing miracles in the first place?
Well, to demonstrate that he had a special connection with God.
Good. The Jewish people, Moses never needed to do that. There were miracles in the Bible,
Right.
but according to Maimonides, that's not why there were miracles. Because you only need a miracle to prove something other people don't. Other people haven't seen.
Okay.
Jesus used miracles to demonstrate that his claim that he didn't claim he was the Son of God. That was the church later. But he claims he was the Messiah.
Right.
And he claimed that he had a direct connection with God.
Right.
That God was talking to him.
Right.
Now, he only needs to prove that. Why? Because no one else saw it. The Jewish people all saw the same thing Moses did. This is, by the way, exactly what Maimonides writes. They saw the same thing he saw. They heard the same thing he heard.
Right.
Not everything. He heard more, but they heard enough to know that Moshe was being spoken to by God. They didn't need Moshe to perform a miracle. That's why Maimonides, by the way, assigns a purely utilitarian, functional approach to miracles. He says miracles are not there to prove anything. They didn't need that proof.
Okay.
The best proof is seeing yourself. The
But
miracles were just there basically to get things done. I mean, this is Maimonides' opinion. Not everybody had agreed. But let me get back to the argument. So it's possible that the Jewish community living at the time of the Exodus, or some person or some group from a later generation, conspired and lied, claiming that millions of Jews stood at Sinai when there in fact was no such event. It's possible.
Okay, yes.
But the Jewish claim that there was so many witnesses present makes that possibility much, much less likely. And that's all you can do when you're going back and trying to not reinvent, but trying to imagine an event that happened that you would witness. You have to just say what makes more sense than the alternative. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in his famous work, the Kuzari, explains why. He says if one or more people were going to fabricate the event, the revelation at Sinai, that person or group would never make the claim. This is a very important point. I'm actually reading this right now, page 66 from my book. This is a very, very key point that Yehuda Halevi and the Kuzari makes. If one or more people were going to fabricate the revelation at Sinai, that person or group that's making the claim would never make the claim that the entire nation was present, because that's a much harder truth to sell. It's a bigger pill to swallow. Think about it. An event witnessed by millions of people would have been known by many others. There would be some memory of the incident, and so it would be much harder to convince people that this supposed event never transpired. Remember also that the person or group fabricating the revelation would need to convince the Jews that this event took place to their own ancestors. Is it possible that they have no knowledge of their own history, of what happened to their own forebears? So arguing, the Kuzari therefore argues, as Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in his classic book, he says, if a person or group of people had invented the revelation story, if it never took place, they never would have claimed that the entire nation witnessed the event. And since that's the story we teach our kids to this day, we're left with only one alternative. The revelation is believed by so many because it actually happened. And even if this argument doesn't rise to the level of evidence or proof, it's much more reasonable to believe that the event occurred than to claim it was fabricated. Because to claim it was fabricated, you'd have to then believe all these people got together at some point, made it up, and then convinced a whole generations of people that this actually took place. And to the Kuzari's point, why would you then make up an event and say everybody was there?
Right. The alternative to believing that it really comes from revelation is believing that someone wrote it down. Someone made it up and wrote it down, and then not only convinced tremendous numbers of people that they were there, but convinced them that their ancestors were there.
Yeah.
And if this was close to the event, then you'd have to convince people that like their grandfather was there, and people wouldn't buy it. And I guess we're barring the possibility that in the intervening 3,000 years, someone made it up and convinced this many people.
So that's the most popular response to this argument that I just shared.
Right.
Of mass revelation.
Right.
Is that it assumes Moses led the Jewish people out of slavery and brought them to Sinai to receive the Torah.
Right.
Maybe later in history, there was this charismatic person who approaches a group of people with this ancient scroll in hand, claiming that 1,000 years earlier, God had taken this enslaved nation out of Egypt, brought them in Sinai, gave them the Torah. The charismatic leader could then have told the group that they were the descendants of these slaves that God had saved, and the scroll that he possessed was the Torah.
Right.
God, the leader, would proceed to claim, instructed him to tell the people to follow him and the Torah scroll that he possessed.
Right.
Right. Now, there'd be no way for the people hearing this to falsify the claim. The people could have conceivably, believed the charismatic leader's story, and that could explain the account of Sinai, which we have to this day. It's not really a direct revelation of God to this mass of people who all claim to have experienced the same event, but really a single person who later convinced the people that the Sinai event had taken long place before. But this is not convincing. You hear the response?
Yeah.
The response I wrote in my book is not convincing, because if a charismatic leader would try to convince a group of people of this story, the first question you would ask is what? If we are the descendants of this group called the Jews, why don't we know who they are?
Right. We would already know this story. You just showed up with your scroll and told me this story, but this is the most amazing historical event that's ever happened. And supposedly it was my great-great-great-grandfather who was there. It would have already been communicated to me.
Yeah. Why are we not aware of this? The plagues, the miracles, the whole revelation? Wouldn't we have some tradition?
Okay, I think the power of this argument has clicked for me. And it took a while for it to click for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if some guy just showed up and said, oh, this thing happened. If he made it up and tried to convince people, people would say, no, we would, if this great thing happened, we would already know about it. You wouldn't be the first person to tell us.
And also, if the answer to that question is that we got the Torah, but over time it was forgotten or lost, I mean, wouldn't that too be our story? Wouldn't parents and teachers be telling their children that we got the Torah at Sinai, but then we lost it and forgot it, and thanks to some great person later on in our history, we regained our lost tradition?
Yeah.
Right.
But that still speaks to the truth of the revelation.
Yeah. Now, there is this thing called the documentary hypothesis. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Once or twice, yeah. Yeah, it comes up a lot, actually.
And it posits that the Torah was written by multiple human authors at different points in history, and that what we refer to as the 5 books of Moses is just a compilation of 4 independent documents which were combined at different points by a series of editors, or what they call redactors.
Right.
Now, the response to this claim is just the same as what we said before. Right? What did we say before to the assertion that a charismatic leader came on the scene and convinced the people their ancestors had received the Torah but forgot it? Why has that not been part of the story of our people? Yeah. If the Torah had been written by multiple human authors in separate documents, which were later combined into this Bible that we have, why haven't parents and teachers been recounting that narrative to their children and students? The story we keep telling our kids for thousands of years is that the Jewish people got the Torah at Sinai. There are no versions of the story that claim that different people wrote the Torah and then combined it at some later date to form the Torah that we have today.
Right.
Now, again, I'm not trying to claim in my book or right now that this proves it. This doesn't prove it. It's still possible that one of these things happened. The question is, what is the most reasonable? And by the way, I that's how we make decisions in life. Yeah. It's not by absolute proof. There was no such thing as absolute proof for anything. You know, we're willing to take people's lives in certain states like Texas for committing a capital crime based on
the preponderance of evidence, right?
Preponderance of evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. We never say, the prosecution never has to prove something 100%.
Right.
You know, but I will tell you, I think the bigger proof is in the Torah itself.
Yes.
There's too much wisdom about the human condition for any person or group of people to have put this thing together in antiquity or in modernity. Right. And it's also too honest. If this was some book written, I wrote this in there also, all the complaints in the wilderness, the golden calf, the sin of the, right? If you look at all ancient documents, the Gospels, the Quran, focus overwhelmingly on the positive qualities of Jesus, Muhammad. Yeah. Kings and other leaders of antiquity generally only wrote of their victories, never their defeats. If the Torah was written by a Jewish king or some Jew, it's very hard to believe it would have been as critical as it actually is. Now, again, that doesn't prove it. I'll tell you what the 2 most powerful things for me are the prophecies coming alive. There are verses in the Torah that it's just impossible for any human being to have seen. The prophet Amos says, and I will bring back the captivity of my people Israel. They will rebuild desolate cities. Yeah. They will come back and plant vineyards, drink their wine. I mean, we're seeing this.
We did it.
Modern Israel is the only country that has entered the 21st century with a net gain in its number of trees, which is even more remarkable because most of Israel is desert.
It's desert.
And Amos' prophecy tells us that the land of Israel is going to be rebuilt only when the Jewish people return to Israel from captivity. And it's only going to bloom. It's only going to turn green. Yeah. Mark Twain visited Israel in 1897, and he described it as a desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over to weeds. And it's just like blah. But if you look at it today, it's green.
Right.
For 2,000 years, it was brown. Yeah. Because it's only when it's in Jewish hands that it starts to blossom. There's some other things also I put in my book that really, to me, it just makes it unlikely a human king.
Right.
You know, the other example I gave is Shemitah. You know, the mitzvah to let the land lay fallow.
Yes.
So if you read it, the mitzvah requires the entire land of Israel not to be worked for the whole year.
Right.
Now, how would people survive?
Right. What are you supposed to eat for a year? Beef jerky?
The other thing, if anybody wants to do, anyone listening to this wants to do some more research, Dr. Joshua Berman goes through all these phrases in the Bible that God took the Jewish people out with an outstretched arm.
Right.
Biad chazaka v'zro netuyah, and finds similar language being used by the pharaohs in their conquest of certain territories. And I'll give you an example. It's actually a mighty hand, outstretched arm is not a very common phrase in the Bible. It only appears in relation to the Exodus and in the inscriptions of the ancient pharaohs of the Egyptian kingdom who ruled in the period of Jewish enslavement, roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE. The pharaohs are routinely described as having mighty hands and outstretched arms. And Dr. Berman suggests that the Torah is engaging what he calls cultural appropriation, using a phrase familiar to people who lived at the time, typically used to express Pharaoh's might, to describe our God's might.
But better.
Yeah. By using a term normally used in Egyptian propaganda, the Bible is not only making the text more relatable to us or to the people of that generation, but sort of out-pharaohing the pharaohs. And that also suggests that the Torah was written at the time of the Exodus and not later. I have a picture in my book here of the, I always I missay this, the Merneptah stele, which can be found in Cairo, Egypt. I'm sorry. It's the earliest reference to Israel that's found. We have some evidence here that we were enslaved at the hands of Egypt.
So we've made our case that we received Torah from Sinai and that there's an unbroken chain of transmission from then to now. But I guess the last question that I really want to give voice to is it necessary for us to believe that, let's say, everything before that pivotal moment in the story really happened? For example, is it necessary to believe that the earth was created in 6 days in kind of the way that it's described in Genesis? You say it could be symbolic and that would be fine.
So first of all, I would definitely suggest anyone really interested in the answer to this question listen to 3 podcasts that I did in the very early parts of this, when it used to be called the Wildes cast in the olden days.
Long time ago. I
interviewed 3 legit physicists.
Oh, cool.
Who also happen to be learned Jews.
Yeah.
Gerald Schroeder, who wrote the book Genesis and the Big Bang, studied at MIT. I also interviewed Natan Slifkin, who's a zoologist and also a rabbi. And then I also interviewed another great rabbi who's a physicist, had like 120 patents and like serious people in the field about the 6 days and about evolution.
Right.
So Gerald Schroeder argues that you don't need to read the Bible literally about the 6 days.
Okay.
Especially because what is a day?
Right. Well, it's 24 hours. Everyone knows that.
Right. Based on what?
Well, the Earth spins around.
On its rotation in regard to the sun.
Correct.
We don't have light. We don't have anything until the 4th day of creation.
I know.
So there is no, like, what's that?
I guess someone was keeping count, right?
Meaning there's no reason to assume that when the Torah describes the world being created in 6 days, that these were 24-hour days. In fact, it makes less sense to assume that.
Okay.
And therefore, each of those days could have been millions, if not billions of years.
And there could be dinosaurs and
100%.
Australopithecus.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we have fossil accounts. We have hard data suggesting that they were prehistoric, kinds of animals that, are millions of years old.
Oh, yeah.
We're not supposed to, according to Maimonides and other great rabbis, look at science and go, it can't be true.
Yeah.
What we're supposed to try to do is understand the Torah and science in relation to one another. There might be some times where we just can't work it out, but this is not one of those times.
Okay.
There's just nothing compelling that we have to read the first 6 days of creation as actual 6 days.
So you say the account of creation in Genesis is an accurate account of the creation, but we shouldn't be naive about thinking that it's really days, that it's really...
Yeah. And just like we don't read, eye for an eye, literally, we don't have to read necessarily the word day as being a 24-hour day as we understand it tonight.
Right.
Especially if that term was used before there was a sun created.
Right. How about Adam and Eve? Do we have to believe that those were real people who did the things
Most rabbis believe there was an Adam and there was an Eve.
Okay.
And there was a Garden of Eden and there was a snake. There was one very notable exception, that's the Rambam. Maimonides believed that this was like a prophecy.
Okay.
And just like Jacob, when he had his dream of a ladder, of angels going up and down the ladder.
Yeah.
That there weren't actual angels with a ladder. It was like a dream. It was like a vision.
Right.
That's sort of the way Maimonides describes the Garden of Eden. It's to teach certain lessons and ideas, but that's most of the other rabbis disagree with the Rambam, and they believe there was an Adam, there was an Eve.
Okay.
I'd have to do a little further research. Like, according to Maimonides, then, who was the first man? There was a first person. There had to have been a first human being.
Right.
We believe that was Adam. Now, I think Maimonides also believes that was Adam, but did he have to have been placed in the Garden of Eden with the snake and all that, the original sin story and all that fun stuff?
Right.
That could have just been a story, kind of a metaphor that the Torah is giving us. But Maimonides believes almost everything else in the Torah is factually correct. Now, when it comes to Midrash, stories that the rabbis brought down to illustrate certain ideas, Maimonides writes that anyone who reads every Midrash literally is a fool. But anyone who reads every Midrash allegorically is a heretic.
Oh, okay.
Now, I've asked a lot of big rabbis this question over the years. How do you know the difference? And they all gave me the same answer. They kind of looked at me, nodded their head, and said, you develop a sensitivity for the language of Chazal, of our sages, when they were trying to make a certain point by creating a story or when it was actually factual. Sometimes it's not as clear, though. But those are not Torah stories. Those are Midrashim.
Right.
Those are stories that are brought down in rabbinic tradition, some of which are meant to be read literally and some not. But you're asking about Bible stories.
Right.
The Bible stories are, generally speaking, we believe true.
Okay.
Now, does that mean you can learn from the Bible how the world was actually created through? Not necessarily. That's why you're supposed to study science.
You are? Who says?
Maimonides wrote that.
Okay.
It's one of the 613 mitzvot.
Is to learn science?
It says that you're supposed to love Hashem.
Okay.
The mitzvah number 5 is V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. It's the first line of the Shema, love the Lord your God.
Right.
Maimonides says, how do you do that? All love starts with appreciation. So you have to learn to appreciate God. How can you appreciate God if God is this other being that is the most different from any person? You start appreciating his creations.
It's like the amazing wonders of biology and physics. And
Correct.
these all come from God. And so we should appreciate them. And in the modern world, we have a really advanced understanding of these things, so we should try to study
and
that.
The
and
more you
it.
study them, and that's why this whole idea of like science and religion and being in conflict is not a Jewish idea.
Okay.
Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory wrote a great book called The Great Partnership, where he argues that science without religion and religion without science, they're both incomplete. You need the two together. Because the science is going to tell us the what, and the religion is going to tell us the why.
So you don't really see an inconsistency between the creation story and like what we've learned about evolution.
No. Now, there might be certain theories that people have about evolution that might contradict. Now, people say, well, can you believe as a religious, as an observant, traditional Jew that we come from apes?
I think evolution doesn't really say that we come from apes, but that we and apes both come from an animal that kind of looks like an ape, but we have a common ancestor.
Right, we have a common ancestor.
But definitely it's a question, can you believe that we come from something that doesn't, is not a human and looks like a monkey?
I think we can. I'll tell you why. This is my feeling based on those conversations with those physicists and others. And at some point, the Torah says that God took form and matter and breathed into a soul.
Right.
Vayipach Elokim nishmat chayim, the Torah says in Genesis. That God breathed into Adam the breath of life.
Oh.
So what was God breathing into?
It could have been some kind of ape Neanderthal type thing.
Some kind of humanoid,
right.
Some kind of physical being that God said, okay, because we are composite of body and soul.
Right.
So he took the most sophisticated body, perhaps, breathed into a soul, and that's a person.
Oh, so it could be that for a very long time, evolution was going on, and then at some point, God looked down and said, okay, it's time for this animal to be more than just an animal. It's time for this animal to have a soul and to know itself and to know me and to serve me. Yeah. And that might be what the creation story is really telling us.
I think so.
Wow.
I mean, it stands to reason.
Yeah. And so maybe to sum up, as we're getting sort of to the end of our time, if you are learning to be a Jew, you want to be a Jew, you want to live a Jewish life, don't get too caught up with having trouble believing the stories of the Torah, because they can be understood in different ways. If you're saying, I want to believe, but I also understand science and I don't want to just turn my brain off when I go into the synagogue, you're saying, no, you don't have to choose between one or the other. These things really do make sense in a deep way, in a way that's consistent with science. And
I think so. I think sometimes you have to struggle to find the science and the interpretation of the Torah that works for you, and it's okay for there to be multiple explanations of the same. There's a concept in the oral tradition called Shivim Panim LeTorah, 70 faces of the Torah. We're not all meant to look at everything exactly the same way. Now, there's certain basic principles like God and revelation and so on and so forth, but the way we relate to those parts of our tradition is going to be very, very different.
Yeah.
And we're all going to grab onto different explanations and interpretations that resonate with us, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And this is a good way, I guess also to begin our descent, if that's what we're doing here. And that is to try to find the parts of Torah that really resonate with you.
Yeah.
And the explanations that really inspire you, as long as they are not just simply made up out of thin air because they're convenient.
Yeah.
And they if we were to simply dispense with all of the theories and ideas that don't make sense to us, or our modern day sensibilities, then basically we have to ask ourselves who we're really serving. Because then we're just coming up with stuff that we like, and that's not called serving God. That's called serving yourself.
Right. So if there's a Jew out there listening, he heard this whole hour and he still says, you know what, I still don't believe in Torah, I think it's all made up. Do you think that person should still try coming to synagogue?
Are you kidding? We got plenty of them here.
Yeah.
We never give up on anyone, number one. And number two, there is a place for a non-believer in Judaism. Even if you don't believe, I have friends, I have colleagues who have real questions and doubts. And they continue to come because they see the value and the wisdom of the Torah, even if they don't accept all of its propositions. One other thing I'd like to say about that is a beautiful book written by one of my teachers and mentors, Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb. You're a Lamb fellow,
That's
Daniel.
Right.
And Rabbi Lamb wrote a book called Doubt and Faith. Faith and Doubt.
Faith and Doubt.
And he says there is a place for doubt. And without doubt, all of science would come to a halt. There is a place for healthy skepticism when it comes to Judaism. Maybe not in shul when you're davening.
Don't interrupt.
Yeah, meaning davening is really a time praying. It's when you just kind of put all those legitimate questions, keep them outside, come in and just be, because you can't really be, it's like going on a date when you're questioning how you feel about the girl. And that often happens.
Oh, yeah.
you can't really enjoy yourself with the person.
Right.
How do you shut your brain off so that your heart can be connected?
Oh, wow. So prayer is a time to kind of let your heart.
That's exactly what prayer is.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean you don't use your brain? No, you do. That's what the base medrash is for.
Right.
That's what the study hall, that's what class is, fellowship, is to ask questions and to struggle and to grapple. The most often asked question in the Talmud is, where'd you get that from?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Right.
And that's a legitimate question in Judaism. In other faith systems, people are like, you don't believe, you're a heretic, get out of here.
Yeah.
We don't believe that.
Yeah.
And it would be a very, very boring community if we just had a bunch of believers coming around and everybody else didn't feel like they belong.
Well, we recently talked to someone who got told, you're a heretic, you're a non-believer, get out. And, it's just this weekend. We talked to someone who grew up in Iran, and it came out that he was a heretic and a non-believer, and he faced death and imprisonment.
William, yeah.
And our faith tradition is not like that.
No. And I'll tell you something. My Zaidi of blessed memory, he was a very pious religious man.
Yeah.
Very open-minded, from Białystok, Poland.
Yeah. And
he had a colleague, a friend, who he used to study with Talmud with for many years, who didn't believe in anything. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in the Torah from Sinai. But he was a Jew.
Yeah.
And he stayed connected by studying Jewish texts.
Yeah.
And he was a pallbearer at my Zaidi's funeral, I remember. I was 17 when my